Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering you are not a person, not legally. You can't own anything, not land, not money, not even, in some places, your own children. You didn't choose who you married. That was decided for you, possibly before you could walk, as a deal between two families. And on the day you were handed over, a price was paid for you. Livestock, usually. You were, in the eyes of the law, worth a certain number of animals. This was not a nightmare. For an enormous number of women across human history, this was just an ordinary life. This was Tuesday. But here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, and it's the reason this video exists. It was not always this way. This was not the natural, default state of our species that we slowly climbed out of. For most of the human story, for tens of thousands of years, women were not property. Somewhere along the line, we built this. Deliberately, systematically, brick by brick. And the story of how it happened is one of the darkest turns our species ever took. So let's ask the real question. Were ancient women slaves? The honest answer is more disturbing than a simple yes or no, because it depends entirely on when you're asking. To understand it, I want you to picture two women. The first lives around 30,000 years ago. She is a forager, part of a small mobile band. She spends her days gathering plants, roots, nuts, small game. And here's the thing most people don't realize. Her work likely provides the majority of her group's calories, not a side contribution, the main one. Her deep knowledge of the land, of which plants heal and which kill, of where the water is and when the food ripens, is not a domestic footnote. It is survival infrastructure. Her voice carries weight when the group makes decisions. She can leave a partner she doesn't want. No one owns her. She is not equal to the men in every possible way, but she is not property, not powerless, and not silent. Now picture the second woman. She lives just a few thousand years ago, in one of humanity's first great civilizations, a place with cities, writing, laws, and wealth. And her life is almost the mirror opposite. She may not be able to leave her home without permission. Her marriage was a contract negotiated between men, her father and her husband, with her as the subject of the agreement rather than a party to it. Her children may legally belong to her husband. Her labor, her body, in some cases her very freedom, none of it is fully, legally hers. Same species, same intelligence, same capacity for thought and feeling, and separated by what, in evolutionary terms, is the blink of an eye. So what happened in between? What turned the first woman into the second? That question is the story of civilization itself, and it is not a pretty one. Let's start with the deep past, because we have to be honest about what the evidence actually shows. For the vast majority of human existence, we lived as hunter-gatherers in small, mobile bands. And the striking thing anthropologists find, both in the archaeological record and in studies of the foraging societies that survived into modern times, is how relatively egalitarian these groups tended to be. Not perfectly equal. Let's not romanticize it into a fantasy. But there was no mechanism for one person to dominate another the way later societies would perfect. And the reason is brutally practical. When you own nothing, you can control very little. A mobile band cannot accumulate wealth. You have to carry everything you own on your back to the next campsite. There are no vaults, no fields, no herds to inherit. And without accumulated wealth, there is very little to fight over, very little to hoard, and very little leverage for one group of people to hold permanent power over another. Women in these societies were economically essential and physically mobile, and that combination gave them something later women would lose: leverage. If a relationship was bad, you could walk. The group needed your labor and your knowledge. You were not disposable, and you were not owned. This is the first woman, and she was the human norm for tens of thousands of years. Whatever inequality existed, and some did, it was nothing like the systematic ownership that was coming, because the thing that would build that ownership hadn't been invented yet. Then it was. Here is the turn. The single most important shift in the entire human story, and the moment things began to change for women. Farming. Around 12,000 years ago, humans began to settle down and cultivate the land. And on the surface, this is the great triumph. Agriculture, the birth of civilization, the foundation of everything we are. But underneath that triumph, something else was quietly being born, because for the first time in human history, people could produce a surplus, more food than they immediately needed. And surplus changes everything. Think about what surplus creates. It creates storable wealth. It creates property. This field is mine. That herd is mine. And the moment you have property, you have two brand new problems that had barely existed before. First, how do you protect and control it? And second, and this is the fatal one, who inherits it when you die? That second question is where the trap closes, because inheritance requires knowing who your children are. And in a system where men are passing property down to their sons, a man becomes obsessed with one specific thing, making absolutely certain that his heirs are actually his. And the only way to guarantee that, in a world with no paternity tests, is to control women, to control their movement, their choices, their bodies, their reproduction. Not because of some sudden change in human nature, but because property and inheritance created a cold, practical incentive to do it. Women's freedom became, in the brutal logic of the new system, a threat to the orderly transfer of wealth. Let that sit for a second. The subjugation of women was not ancient instinct. It was, in large part, a side effect of inheritance, of accounting, of men wanting to make sure the farm went to the right son. And once that incentive existed, humans did what humans do. They built systems around it. Elaborate, durable, self-reinforcing systems. And this is where the story gets genuinely dark, because we can watch it happen in the historical record. Marriage transformed. What may once have been a flexible arrangement between two people hardened into a contract between families, specifically between men. A woman moved from the control of her father to the control of her husband, and the transaction was often literal. A bride price or a dowry changed hands. Wealth moved, and the woman moved with it, which tells you exactly how she was being categorized in the ledger, as part of the deal. And then it got written down. This is what makes the ancient world so chilling to study. We are not guessing. The earliest law codes humanity produced, some of the very first things we ever wrote down as organized societies, include laws that treat women as the property of men. Laws setting the price of a bride. Laws about what a husband may do. Laws in which the penalty for harming a woman is paid not to her, but to the man who owns her, her father or her husband. Because the damage recorded is damage to his property, not to her as a person. In some codes, a woman's legal standing sat closer to that of livestock or an enslaved person than to that of a free man. This was not the exception hiding in the margins. In many places, it was the written, official, foundational law. I want to be careful and honest here, because the truth matters more than a clean story. This did not happen everywhere identically, and it did not happen all at once. Some societies were harsher, some far less so. In some places and periods, women held property, ran businesses, wielded real influence, even ruled. History is not a single line, but the broad, undeniable pattern is this. As societies grew wealthier, more settled, more obsessed with property and inheritance and control, women's status tended to fall. And in the harshest cases, it fell all the way to ownership. The direction of the drift is unmistakable, and it points the wrong way. So were ancient women slaves? Here is the honest, uncomfortable answer. For most of human history, no. The first woman, the forager, was no one's property. She was essential, mobile, and free in ways her descendants would lose. To call all of prehistory a story of enslaved women is simply false, and it erases how much women once had. But in the civilizations we tend to celebrate as the dawn of everything, the cities, the writing, the law, the wealth, the answer for a great many women edges disturbingly close to yes. Not always in the exact technical sense of being enslaved, but in the deeper sense that matters. Owned, controlled, traded, and denied personhood by the official rules of their world. And the most unsettling part is that this wasn't a failure of civilization. It was built directly into civilization's foundations, right alongside the achievements we admire. The same surplus that gave us art and cities and writing gave us, in the same breath, a machinery for controlling half the population. That is the hard truth this topic refuses to let you avoid. We did not inherit the subjugation of women from some brutal animal, past that we've been nobly escaping ever since. We invented it. Relatively recently, as a byproduct of wealth, and then we spent thousands of years encoding it into law, custom, and belief so thoroughly that people came to see it as natural, as the way things had always been. But it wasn't. And that's the thing worth holding on to. Because here is why the two women matter. The first one, the free forager, proves something the second one's world tried to erase. She proves that this was never inevitable, that there is nothing in human nature that requires women to be owned. For tens of thousands of years, our species lived otherwise. The cage was not built into us. It was built by us, for reasons of property and power, at a specific point in time. Which means it was always, in principle, something that could be unbuilt. And that's exactly the long, difficult, unfinished work that came after. The slow, clawing back of everything the second woman lost. It took thousands of years. In much of the world, it is still underway. But every step of it has been, in a sense, a return. A movement back towards something our oldest ancestors would have recognized. The forager who owned herself. So the next time someone tells you that the way things are is just human nature, that some hierarchy is simply the natural order, remember the first woman. Remember that for most of our story, we lived another way. The oppression came from somewhere. It had a beginning, and anything with a beginning can have an end. That's not a comforting story, but it might be a hopeful one. What do you think? If that first woman could see the world we've built and the long fight to undo what came after her, would she recognize any of it? Let me know in the comments. See you soon.